My name is Camille Arden. And the day my family tried to erase me from my own bloodline was the day I learned how quickly love can turn into applause for your downfall. I walked into my parents' home in Tampa expecting tension, but I didn't expect a full celebration built on a lie. White tablecloths, champagne flutes, and 30 relatives packed into the living room as if they were attending a victory parade. And at the center of it all stood my older brother Riley, grinning like the crown had already been placed on his head. He tapped his glass and told everyone he had an announcement, and the room immediately leaned toward him. He held Betrayal by the waist, raised his drink, and said that our parents had decided to leave all 8 rental homes in Florida to him alone. The room exploded in cheers, whistles, and backslaps like he'd just saved the entire state. Betrayal kissed his cheek and said this was the beginning of their future. And my mother dabbed a proud tear beneath her eye. I didn't clap. I didn't smile. I didn't move. I just watched Riley bask in the praise he thought he'd earned, and felt the weight of everyone waiting for me to play along. My father kept his eyes on me like I was a problem he expected to solve itself. My mother gave me that soft, pitying smile she used when she wanted me to shrink. Riley smirked as if daring me to ruin his moment. I stood up slowly and stepped forward, and the room hushed so fast I could hear the air conditioner humming in the corner. I told Riley he was celebrating something that didn't belong to him, and the smile fell off his face before he could catch it. My father's hand froze halfway to his drink, and Betrayal lowered her glass with her lips still parted. I told them they had all forgotten one thing that Evelyn Arden never forgot. Every eye shifted to the suitcase I set beside the coffee table, and a ripple of unease moved through the room. For the first time all afternoon, Riley didn't look confident. He looked scared, and he didn't even know why yet. The moment my words cut through the room, Riley let out a short laugh, the kind he used when he thought someone was being ridiculous. He told everyone I was only acting out because I had never understood what it meant to contribute to the family. He said he had spent years holding everything together, while I lived in Atlanta pretending to be important in some office. His voice carried the same arrogance he'd worn since childhood, polished and rehearsed for an audience that wanted to believe him. Betrayal stepped closer to him, twirling her glass with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She asked if I was doing okay up there in Atlanta, letting her tone drip with the kind of sweetness that hides poison. She whispered to Riley that loneliness makes people do strange things, and her friends standing behind her snickered. She looked at me as if I were an outsider crashing a party she had planned. My mother placed a hand on my arm and told me not to make this harder than it needed to be. She said Riley had been here, managing the homes, talking to tenants, helping the family every day while I built my life somewhere else. My father slid a packet of papers across the table and said the attorney had prepared a simple waiver for me to sign. He told me that signing it would keep everything peaceful and avoid unnecessary drama. I looked at the waiver, and then at Riley leaning back with a smirk. I'm already convinced I would fold. My mother quietly begged me not to create tension, and my father said this was the only reasonable option. Riley folded his arms and asked why I always needed to make things about me. The room waited for me to take the pen like a good, obedient daughter. I pushed the papers back toward my father with one finger and told him I wasn't signing anything. My voice didn't rise, but the room felt it like a slap. Riley scoffed and asked what right I thought I had to refuse. I told him I wasn't refusing out of pride or fear, but because none of them had the authority to demand I abandon what wasn't theirs to give. The air shifted, and the relatives who had been smiling moments earlier went quiet. Riley stepped forward and told me to stop being dramatic, insisting the properties were his responsibility, and therefore his future. He said I didn't even understand the business since I lived so far away. I met his stare and told him distance had never blinded me, but entitlement clearly blinded him. I reached for the handle of my suitcase and rolled it forward until it touched the coffee table. The sound of the wheels clicking against the hardwood stopped every whisper in the room. I told them the truth wasn't hiding, and it didn't need to shout to be heard. The first crack in Riley's confidence finally appeared, and he saw that whatever I had brought with me wasn't fear. It was evidence. The room held its breath when I placed my hand on the suitcase, as if everyone sensed the ground tilting beneath them. I told them that 3 years ago, long before anyone here started planning their little celebration, Evelyn Arden made a decision none of them saw coming. My mother shook her head as if denial could restart time, and my father whispered my grandmother's name like it was a warning. Riley just stared at me, jaw tight, waiting for me to blink first. I unlatched the suitcase and lifted out the first folder, its edges worn from years of quiet importance. I told them Evelyn hadn't left things open to interpretation or favors or family loyalty. She sealed her choice with full clarity and more awareness than any of them ever gave her credit for. My father muttered that Evelyn was fragile in her last years, and I could hear the panic in his voice. I looked him in the eye and asked why a fragile woman would leave a flawless set of documents, all signed, notarized, and recorded with the county. Riley barked out that it was impossible because Evelyn would have told them if something so serious had happened. I told him my grandmother didn't mistake noise for authority the way he did. She didn't trust volume, she trusted character. I laid the first deed on the coffee table, and the seal caught the light like a quiet verdict. Then I laid down the second and the third until all 8 rested between us, like a wall no one could climb. I explained that Evelyn transferred ownership to me through quitclaim deeds and a revocable living trust, all executed years ago. My mother gasped as if the papers themselves had betrayed her. Riley stepped forward and accused me of manipulating Evelyn in her final months, claiming she was confused and overwhelmed. I told him confusion doesn't produce signatures that match perfectly with documents she'd signed decades earlier. I reminded him that he wasn't the only one who spent time with her, even if he thought proximity guaranteed loyalty. For the first time that afternoon, Riley's confidence cracked into something desperate. Before he could speak, Noah stepped out from the edge of the room where he'd been standing quietly. He explained that he was the one who drove Evelyn to the notary and waited in the car while she signed everything. A murmur rolled across the room as relatives turned toward him, surprised that the quietest person in the family held a truth that heavy. My mother whispered Noah's name like she couldn't believe he had chosen honesty over harmony. Noah said that Evelyn made him promise not to reveal anything until the moment someone tried to take what wasn't theirs. His voice didn't tremble, and for the first time in years, he didn't look small standing beside our family. I let the silence settle before speaking again, telling them Evelyn didn't make decisions out of spite or favoritism. She made them out of clarity. She saw exactly who would protect her life's work and who would drain it without remorse. And she acted before any of them had the chance to rewrite what she built. The room was already shaking under the weight of the deeds. But I wasn't finished. I reached back into the suitcase and pulled out a thicker folder, the one Evelyn asked me to keep sealed until the exact moment someone tried to claim what they believed they deserved. I told them ownership was only one layer of the truth, and the second layer was far uglier. Riley let out a strained laugh and said I was dragging this out because I love drama. But even his voice wavered. I opened the folder and laid the first set of financial statements on the table, the numbers crisp and impossible to ignore. I pointed to the maintenance expenses that had ballooned over the last several years, all under Riley's personal management. My mother leaned in, her face draining as she read line after line. My father swallowed hard when I told them the total missing amount was over $400,000. Riley barked that I didn't know anything about running properties and claimed the houses needed repairs. I tapped the invoices one by one, explaining that the roof repair listed for $28,000 never happened. The yard redesign for $17,000 didn't exist, and the plumbing overhaul for $9,600 was fabricated from start to finish. I reminded them that every tenant had confirmed no such work was ever done. I said the words slowly, letting each one settle like a weight he couldn't throw off. I pulled out photocopied receipts barely legible, Covered in handwriting, he assumed no one would ever examine closely. I told him the handwriting matched his lease notes and his tenant messages. All unmistakably his. Brielle stepped back as if the papers were toxic. And she stared at Riley with a confusion that quickly shifted into fear. Even the relatives who adored him began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Riley slammed his hand on the table and called me a liar, saying I was twisting numbers to make him look bad. I told him I didn't have to twist anything because the truth didn't need my help. I reminded him that financial fraud leaves footprints even the clumsiest investigator could follow. And he had walked through wet cement without looking behind him. His face reddened as he told me to shut up. But it only made the silence heavier. I laid down a printed email trail, showing how he had rerouted rent payments through a secondary account he never disclosed. My father whispered Riley's name in disbelief. But Riley refused to meet his eyes. I pointed to the dates and transaction IDs, all tied back to him, and told everyone that this wasn't an accident or oversight. It was theft, layered with arrogance and wrapped in entitlement. Brielle's breathing grew uneven as she stared at the numbers. And then she slowly removed the engagement ring she had proudly flashed all afternoon. She placed it on the table beside the fraudulent invoices without saying a word. The metallic clink of the ring landing was the loudest sound in the room. Riley reached for her, but she pulled away before he could touch her. She grabbed her purse and walked toward the door without looking back at him. And the screen door slammed hard behind her as she disappeared outside. Riley stood frozen, abandoned, in the moment he assumed would be his triumph. I told him the truth didn't come to ruin his life. It came to reveal what he had already ruined on his own. The room was already unraveling, but I knew the final layer would cut deeper than anything I had shown so far. I told everyone that financial theft was only part of the picture and that consequences always travel in pairs. Riley tried to laugh again, but the sound came out thin and desperate. I could see him realizing he was running out of places to hide. I placed another set of documents on the table, this time marked with federal letterheads that were impossible to ignore. I explained that the fraudulent maintenance expenses he created hadn't just drained the family assets. They had been written off on tax filings he submitted under the guise of property operations. My father blinked as if he couldn't understand what that meant, and my mother clutched the back of a chair to steady herself. I told them quietly that the IRS never overlooks creative accounting, especially when personal vacations are disguised as property inspections. Riley stepped toward me with his hands balled into fists, saying I was trying to ruin his life for attention. I told him that I didn't have the power to ruin a life already sinking under its own weight. I reminded him that IRS auditors don't care about family politics or wounded pride. His face shifted from anger to panic so quickly it almost hurt to watch. Noah stepped up beside me, holding a printed spreadsheet of suspicious deductions Riley had made for years. He said he found them when he reviewed old email chains Evelyn kept for her records. Riley turned on him with a look of betrayal. But Noah didn't back down. He simply said that protecting the truth mattered more than protecting a brother who had used the family like a personal wallet. My father fell into a chair, staring at the floor as if trying to rewind the last 10 minutes. My mother begged me to stop, insisting Riley had just made mistakes and didn't deserve to have his future destroyed. I reminded her that I wasn't the one who signed false documents, opened unauthorized accounts, or siphoned money from tenants who trusted him. I told her the truth wasn't an attack, it was accountability in its purest form. Riley lunged forward again, but I didn't move. I told him the IRS would contact him soon, and that the payment plan waiting for him would follow him for years. His breathing turned ragged as the weight of his choices finally settled on him. He asked if I felt proud of myself. I told him I didn't come here to win. I came here to make sure he couldn't take anything else from our family. And I reminded him that collapse isn't punishment. It's the natural end of a structure built on lies. The weeks that followed felt strangely quiet, as if the storm inside that living room had finally stepped out into the world to finish what it started. Riley was the first to feel the fallout when the IRS notice arrived, freezing the accounts he'd used for years without anyone questioning him. He called my father in a panic, begging him to make calls or find someone who could fix things. But there was nothing to fix. His arrogance had finally met something immune to manipulation. The second blow landed when Brielle's mother came to collect the rest of her daughter's things from Riley's apartment. The engagement was officially over, and Brielle didn't bother speaking to him herself. She apparently told her friends she refused to build a life on debt, fraud, and bad energy. Riley tried to paint himself as the victim, but even his closest friends stopped entertaining his excuses. Within a month, Riley's management position dissolved because the property manager no longer wanted his name attached to anything involving the rentals. He tried interviewing for new jobs, but the background checks weren't kind to a man suddenly drowning in penalties and flag deductions. He ended up selling cars on Dale Mabry, wearing a smile too tight to hide the embarrassment. I heard from Noah that Riley sometimes drove past the rentals and parked across the street before speeding away the moment he saw my management sign in the yard. My parents were next, and their fall was quieter but somehow heavier. The house they'd been so proud of became impossible to maintain, with dwindling savings and medical bills creeping up on my father. They put it on the market. Sold the boats first, then the jet skis, and finally several pieces of jewelry my mother once swore she'd pass down to her grandchildren. They moved into a 2-bedroom condo overlooking a parking lot instead of the bay they had admired for decades. My mother left me a voicemail asking if we could forget everything and start over. But her voice cracked under the weight of consequences she never imagined she'd face. I listened to it once and realized she still didn't understand the difference between reconciliation and accountability. My father didn't reach out at all. Maybe out of shame. Maybe out of habit. Because silence had always been his easiest escape. Neither of them tried to challenge the deeds again. Meanwhile, the tenants adjusted to the new payment instructions without much notice or concern. Their repairs were completed properly. Their calls were returned promptly. And their rent remained steady. They didn't care about the family drama. They cared about stability. And I gave them exactly that. The income covered my mortgage in Atlanta and left enough to invest in 2 more small properties. Noah stayed in touch, sending quick messages to check on me. And I always answered those. He said the rest of the family talked about me in past tense, as if pretending I no longer existed made their choices easier to swallow. I told him that was fine with me, because peace sometimes requires distance, and distance sometimes requires a clean cut. No one walked away untouched, and for the first time in my life, none of it was on my shoulders. Life settled into a quieter rhythm after the dust finally stopped rising. And for the first time in years, I felt the air around me clear. I placed every deed, every trust page, and every document Evelyn signed into a fireproof folder and set it on the highest shelf of my closet. I didn't open it often because I no longer needed proof to remind myself what was mine. The peace it represented was louder than the chaos that created it. Some nights, I sat on my balcony overlooking Midtown, letting the hum of the city replace the echoes of old arguments. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who asked for help and was told resources were tight because Riley needed something more important. I thought about how easily I accepted a smaller place in a family that had already decided who deserved the spotlight. And I thought about Evelyn, who saw through all of it long before I ever learned to speak up. Noah continued to check in, sending short messages that carried more sincerity than anything I'd heard from my parents in years. He said the family still spoke about me like a shadow they couldn't quite erase, and that they acted as if I'd disappeared voluntarily. I told him that was close enough to the truth, because distance felt safer than pretending we could rebuild what was never real. I didn't need their approval, and I didn't crave their apologies. Riley never reached out again, and I didn't expect him to. He stayed in Tampa, working the kind of job that forced him to meet people face to face every day. the kind who might unknowingly ask him about properties he once bragged about owning. My parents kept their silence too, trapped between regret and pride, unsure of which one hurt more. I let their silence stay exactly where it belonged. In the end, I understood something Evelyn had known all along. Families don't break in an instant. They break in all the moments when people choose comfort over truth. She chose truth, and I chose to honor it. They didn't lose a daughter. They lost the privilege of hurting me again. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it struck a chord or reminded you of your own battles, share your thoughts below. Your voice matters here. Don't forget to subscribe for more true-to-life stories of justice, strength, and redemption. Until next time, take care of your peace.